My name is Caitlin Kessheimer, and I'm an extension entomologist with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. And today I'll be talking about insect pests of turf. As temperatures are warming up and grasses are greening up, we're going to start to see a lot more of these pests in our backyards or in our turf systems. And so for today, what I'm going to talk about are some of the major pests to look out for here in Alabama, sampling techniques that can give you a better idea of what is in your turf. And then I'll end with fall armyworms, which were the celebrity of 2021, and how we can better prepare for 2022. And so before I get started, there's just two key points that I want to mention about insects in turf systems. They are not going to be uniform and they're not going to be random where you find these pests. We just can't go out to a lawn and find equal numbers of insects everywhere. This is going to be driven by where insects feed. We're only going to find specialized insects feeding on grass, and then within turf, there are specific places that have unique conditions for certain pests that allow them to really thrive in that type of environment. And so understanding that there is going to be something that brings those pests to a particular area is crucial for not spending so much time looking everywhere, but where is the most likely place to find those insects. So when we're talking about turf pests, we really have two types: above ground that are feeding on the grass blades or in the thatch, and then below ground that use the soil to develop as immatures. There may be a life stage above ground for some of these underground pests, but in most cases, the immature and damaging life stage is going to be underground. And when I mention that pests are going to be found near where they feed, you can see an example here is of the chinch bug. They prefer thatchy soils and sunny locations. And so even if it's a grass that they do prefer, if it's in a shady location, you will have a less likely chance of finding chinch bugs there. And then another example is mole crickets. They prefer sandy or sandy loam soils. The way they move and tunnel through the soil, they can't really dig very well in those thicker clay soils. And so you'll likely find them, especially in the southern part of the state, in sandy or sandy loam soils. And the first step to managing insect pests is sampling and correct identification to figure out what is out there. There's going to be a lot of techniques we can use depending on the suspected pest or the size of your operation. There's a lot of different techniques. If you have a cup cutter or a spade, a soap drench is probably going to be your easiest one. Flotation sample for things like chinch bugs and trapping. And entomology in general doesn't require a lot of complicated materials. So things like shovels, watering cans, soap, water, nothing too serious that we can use or easily find to do this sampling. And then when it comes to sampling, there's also some other things we can look for that give us a clue about insects and their presence. And so if we have animal foraging in our backyard, there may be some white grubs or other food for them that they're looking for. And so that'll tell us that there's something going on. So think about armadillos or raccoons digging in your backyard. They're not just doing it for fun, they're looking for food. We can also learn to identify the non-damaging life stage to see if the pest is present. And so in this example here, fall armyworm eggs, they lay them on flat surfaces. And so we'll often see a lot of these in our backyard, on pool liners, the sides of houses, electrical boxes, and that will clue us into the fact that they're going to hatch soon and turn into caterpillars that will start eating the grass. Another example is adult Japanese beetles or other adult beetles that have the underground grub life stage. If we see those, then it likely means they are mating and laying eggs, which are going to burrow in the ground and start feeding on roots. And so that's all to say, looking at pest location and where you find it can help with pest ID. And so I'm going to just cover a couple of these, but these are the usual suspects when it comes to turf pest insects. Above ground, we'll find caterpillars, chinch bugs, spittle bugs, mites, bill bugs, and fire ants. And then below ground pests, grubs, mole crickets, ground pearls, bill bugs, and fire ants. And you'll see a star next to billbugs and fire ants because they can be both above ground and below ground. And so with the time I have today, I'm just going to cover a couple of these and some of the best ways to identify them to see if that's your problem. And then, like I mentioned, I will wrap up with fall armyworm. And so the first pests to talk about are chinch bugs. We have about 3 to 4 generations a year here in Alabama. They're probably currently hunkered down for the winter. We've had some really warm days, and so you may see them moving around, but really once we get warmer temperatures, they'll be a lot more active. And all life stages of this pest do feed on grass, and we see that the most commonly damaged grass are St. Augustine and zoysia grass. We do end up with a lot of damage sometimes that can progress to where the entire lawn is killed, and in that case, there's nothing to do here but renovate the entire lawn. But you'll see this characteristic discoloration along with that feeding line. So we can see that chinch bugs are actually advancing into that greener grass. And the other bug, it's related to the chinch bug. It feeds above ground and it sucks juices from the plants. And this is the 2-line spittlebug. And as entomologists, we're very creative when we're naming insects. And so the 2-line spittlebug gets its name for 2 things. It has, as the adult form, it has these 2 lines on its body. And the immatures or nymphs, they live in this spittle mass. As the nymphs feed, it creates a lot of excess fluid, and then it uses that fluid to create a frothy mass around itself for protection. And then the adults are going to be free living, hopping around where the nymphs are in the grass. And so when you're looking at damage, the grass is going to have a scorched appearance. Basically looked like it's deprived of water when otherwise it's getting enough water. We see 2-line spittlebugs in years with high spring rainfall or lawns that are overwatered. You'll also see this purplish, reddish color in the grass. That is a reaction to the saliva of the spittlebug that injects it as they feed. And we do see outbreaks of this population, and in many cases, we don't see them until the adults are hopping around on our lawnmowers as we're mowing the lawn. And this is just a brief timeline of the 2-line spittlebug. We're seeing eggs hatch now in March and April, and then they'll remain in this spittle mass as nymphs for 6 to 8 weeks before they turn into adults, who then will lay eggs and complete the next generation. We have 2 peaks of adults in late May or June, and then again in August. And the adults can actually be fairly long-lived if nothing eats on them. And we do have a set of eggs that's laid for overwintering. And so we have about 2 generations over a year, and we might get an extra one down in coastal Alabama. But we can see a lot of damage if we do have high populations of this one. And then moving on to one of our major underground pests are white grubs. And this is going to be a couple different species of beetles, but they all have an underground life stage that feeds on the roots. And so the eggs are laid in the soil, they'll hatch, and the larvae will feed. A lot of these are called annual white grubs because they complete their life cycle in a year, and the damage they do, you can see this infested grass has dry yellow patches, and sometimes you can actually just roll up the turf like a carpet, and that's where you can find a lot of these grubs. And so now as the soil temperatures are warming up, they're going to feed on the roots, and then they'll complete their development and emerge as adults. And then over the course of a pretty short time, less than a month, all these adults will lay eggs and then develop fairly quickly through their life stage. And this is that damaging life stage. So you can see the hardened head and the legs there. And what they're going to be doing is feeding on the roots down in the soil. And so, yeah, if you can pull your grass back like this, then there's something going on that is not allowing the roots to attach very well to the soil. And you may not see these. And like I mentioned before, animals in your backyard are going to be there because, similar to insects, they follow the food. And so if you see skunks or possums or armadillos, they'll be poking around or looking for food, and that can also cause damage as they dig to find those grubs. And another underground pest that we encounter are mole crickets. We have 2 species of introduced mole crickets here in Alabama. And the best and easiest way to identify this goofy looking insect is with their shovel-like front legs. And that's where they get their name, the mole cricket. We do not see these large digging legs on anything else in turf. And so if you see something like that, it's probably going to be a mole cricket. And so what they do is they live their entire life in the soil, and then they create these tunnels that open at the surface. And so you end up with pretty widespread damage. We do have 1 generation per year, but it crosses over the course of 2 years. And May and June is where these are going to be hatching from their eggs, and then they progress through all their life stages. And the immatures look like just shrunken down versions of the adults. And really, it's when these eggs first hatch that we have our best chance of killing them, because they're a little bit smaller and easy to control. And lastly, I mentioned I would talk about fall armyworms. And if you were outside at all or on any sort of turf or grass or some other crops for that matter, you may have seen fall armyworms. And so this is what we ran into, just gobs and gobs of worms. We would see a lot of damage across the lawns. And it really just took off and consumed most of the summer. We had a really, really long fall armyworm season last year. And this is a good picture that really displays the fall armyworm's name. So this is where the infestation started. And like true to their name, the armyworms moved in army fashion across the lawn. And you can see this is as far as they got. By the time this picture was taken, and if left untreated, they will continue on marching and consuming grass as they go. We do have a couple different caterpillars in turf systems, and so the easiest way to identify the fall armyworms is these 2 characters here, looking for the upside down or right side up, depending how you're looking at it, Y on the head of the armyworm, and then if you look on its backside, there's going to be 4 raised bumps that make a perfect square on the back of the worm. Caterpillars, including fall armyworms, come in different colors, and a lot of them have these markings along their body. But if you have these 2 characters on the same worm, it's a good chance that it is a fall armyworm. When they're full grown, they can be a little bit over an inch long. So I mentioned earlier that one of the ways we can scout for pests is knowing what the other life stages look like and identifying those. And so this picture shows fall armyworm eggs from last year. This is a swing set on a child's play set. And they like to lay on flat surfaces. So think about what you have in your backyard that may be perfect for armyworms. And one of the easiest ways is just to scrape these off or even power wash them on and kill the eggs, so they won't hatch into worms that eat your grass. It's important to note that they are very, very tiny when they first hatch. These super cute first instar armyworms with their heads that are too big for their body will eat and grow up. And as they get bigger, they will eat more and more. And this graph actually shows those early instar young caterpillars are not doing a lot of feeding in the first week and a half of their life. But then once they get to be older larvae, before they're going to burrow into the ground and change into an adult moth, is when they really do about 80% of their feeding. And so if we can find them in this first week and a half, we have a much better chance of controlling them before they become this big and they eat all that food and cause damage. And so when we are planning for 2022, the best thing we can do is brush up on fall armyworm knowledge, identification, and biology. If you have an operation where you get lots of armyworms year after year, prioritize those areas and know when and where to scout in your operation. This is a migratory pest, and so talk to people, especially those further south that may have a heads up, and then you can make a plan. We're in a year of high prices and maybe shortages for insecticides, and so having a plan and a backup plan is going to be crucial. And without going into too much detail here, specifically for our fall armyworm, we have a lot of chemical control options, but you're going to pick them based on your system and what you need. We have the cheaper pyrethroids where there is some reduced susceptibility and a shorter residual. So if this fits your system, that's fantastic. But if you need a much longer residual and it's in your budget, then the newer chemistries like chlorine trinylprole, we see really good control that can last weeks. And so before making this plan, consider what the goal is, and when you're looking at the time of year, how long is that control needed? So with that, I'll wrap up here. This is all my contact information, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions. This was a really short recap of things you may see in turf. And so if you encounter something that you're not sure about this summer or have questions about control, please feel free to reach out. Thanks.